We're going to lead off today talking about custom fields. The goal of these conversations is to approach things in a very theoretical manner and be able to think about and talk about these ideas in a very objective way, and then to look at them in a practical application in a business that is not property management. That's actually purposeful, even though we're just trying to show off our own systems. We also want you to be able to look at how systems ought to work outside of property management, because while obviously most of the people in this group are going to be property managers, it's important to understand the concept and how to get the most value out of that particular concept without limiting yourself to a particular stratosphere. Because you will find, at least I have found, that there is tons and tons of crossover as you become more of a process thinking person into all the other parts of our lives. Let that be your personal, or if you have other parts of your business that are running, maybe you have a maintenance business or a brokerage business or something of this nature. And there's so many ways that we can leverage these technologies in a million different areas. So we're going to look at things very theoretically today and just start a conversation there and see where we go. And as Chris mentioned, the goal here is to make a community and tools that are valuable to you as property management company. If you have specific feedback, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to spam Chris with all of your ideas, but we're also going to be sending out some forms and soliciting some feedback that way. Let's dive in, talk about custom fields. All right, Mike, I'm going to ask you some questions here, and this is not intended as a pop quiz, but more as a conversation, so we'll see how that goes. But so, Mike, let's define custom fields for our viewers. What would you say a custom field is, and what is it intended to accomplish?
In an ideal world, a custom field is a personalized piece of information that I need to store and be able to reutilize in other parts of a business. So if I have a particular piece of information that my software doesn't support, but allows me to create, then I can store a very key piece of information for that specific thing. If we're talking property management, a very specific lease term that I need to store for a specific resident, and then the ability to reutilize that elsewhere in my business and know that I can quickly access it. I would say that's a pretty good, solid definition and use of a custom field.
Yeah, now a clarification on that, because there are a lot of pieces of information that we gather on a regular basis throughout our business, whether it be in a custom field or a native field. Talking about the difference between those two, custom fields, like you mentioned, is something that you can create. You can choose, I need this field for this piece of information, and it's not being tracked anywhere else. So boom, I'm creating this field, and then I get to use it on a recurring basis. A native field is something that the designers of the software said, hey, you're going to want this information, so we're including this field so that you can use it as you desire. Now, obviously, you don't have to leverage those fields, but they're there because the designers of the software have suggested that this is a valuable piece of information. Custom fields are for you to get creative with and say, I need this other piece of information that really doesn't fall within the bounds of what the original design of the software was, but I need it. And I need to be able to track this, and I need to be able to use it. And of course, there's lots of different ways that we can use custom fields. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now, obviously, a lot of the folks in this group are going to be here from being LeadSimple users. So I think we'll talk about that for a moment, how custom fields work in LeadSimple. In LeadSimple, being a software, the software is comprised of objects. All right. And again, this is going to sound a little bit theoretical, but the terminology for programming is that they are called objects. And the objects that you'll see in LeadSimple, where you can tie custom fields to those objects, are leads, processes, properties, units, and contacts. Okay. As of now, there aren't any other objects in LeadSimple. However, if you want to join our lobby to ask LeadSimple to make more objects, please put your votes in the chat because there's some really cool things that we can do there in the long term. But that aside, within LeadSimple, you have these 5 key objects. And around those objects, we can store all kinds of information like we talked about. Now, of course, there's some native fields which LeadSimple has designed. You're going to want this information. An example of that is going to be a property address, right? We want an address so that we can track back the location or store at minimum the name of the location in relation to a particular property. Another example, again, related to properties, might be a lease start or end date. Or for a contact, you might have a first name and last name. And again, this doesn't sound like rocket science, right? This is pretty basic stuff, but these are important factors when a software is designed. And really what we're hoping to educate you guys on is understanding how the software is designed so that you can leverage it and get as much value out of it as possible. Now, Mike, I want to turn things over to you for a second and maybe tell us a little bit about some common custom fields that we see used, and maybe you could extrapolate a little bit on the difference between, specifically in LeadSimple, about the different kinds of fields and what some of their functions are.
Yeah. One of the big things is identifying what a custom field isn't. And most people are used to storing custom information inside of a note. And the big key takeaway on custom fields is you have to be able to reutilize them. So just storing information isn't enough. It's the ability to be able to utilize them elsewhere. As far as some common custom fields that show up, if we're looking at the custom field types that LeadSimple supports specifically, one of the big differentiating factors where property managers can get confused as to which one to use are the differences between property custom fields and unit custom fields. And the big delineating factor is what is something that is unit specific that I need to store versus what is something that usually or 99% of the time will entail the property. Let's say you have a keyless entry. And the unit, you have a property with 3 units. Each unit will have its own key code or access code or master code. When we're getting ready to show properties, we want each unit to be able to capture and store their individual gate code or access code. We don't want the whole property, because then on an individual unit level, it's going to be pretty hard to identify which unit has a specific gate code. Other ones are like amenities or appliances that are very specific to the unit, like is a fridge included, the make, model, number, color of the unit of the appliances as well. And then on a bigger level is if you're managing an HOA, and what are HOA amenities? That's a more property specific level. Does it include like a golf course or a gym or a pool, a community pool? Those are property specific things, because every unit in that property that you're managing will have access to those amenities. So being able to identify what that distinction is keeps your processes clean and helps you be able to better access your specific custom fields. So you can ensure that there's no crossover and you're not searching for something that doesn't exist because it was placed wrong.
That makes perfect sense. So let's transition a little bit and maybe talk about how we use custom fields from LeadSimple specifically. LeadSimple offers a number of different functions that live within custom fields. Like we talked about, 5 different types. And of those 5 different types, there are specific functions that are available. The particular function that most of us will have heard of and potentially have leveraged is this idea of conditional logic, or if this, then that. And a way that I found helpful to describe conditional logic is by use of a very well-known children's book you probably heard of at some point, especially if you have kids, which is if you give a mouse a cookie. And the second part of that line is he's going to want a glass of milk. And you may have read the Moose and Muffin one. That's okay. I won't judge. But that idea captures conditional logic perfectly. And in fact, I do wonder, I don't know this, but I do wonder if the writers of that book are secretly trying to influence our children to be programmers. Could be, I don't know. I'm just a conspiracy theorist over here.
It's a classic book.
It's a good one. But in any case, that idea of conditional logic is as simple as that. Now, the ramifications of that, yeah, pig pancake, absolutely. I forgot about that one. That's a good one too. I know you're judging me over here, Tommy. Sorry, got to call out the good ones.
I like all of them. I'm not going to judge anybody.
They're all pretty good.
I think there's a dog and a donut somewhere too.
Oh, all right. Those people have a monopoly on that idea, and I'm sure they have some serious patents that are locking that down unless someone wants to try to break that. But in any case, that idea of the logic that is outlaid there, if this, then that, is exactly what we use as we're developing processes in LeadSimple. Now, the extrapolation of that logic may get a little bit more complex because we may have multiple layers of if this, then that. And if you can picture in your head a pyramid scheme for a moment, not because we want to sell you one, but because it's actually a very helpful picture of conditional logic. If you start at the top with one branch, right, the very top of the condition, then there may be multiple options, right? Let's just say 2 for sake of simplicity, right? So we have 2 options, and then off of our first branch, we have a new field or a new question that offers 3 options. And then over here on the other side, we have a question that offers 4 options, right? So we're broadening our conditional reach dramatically. And it's important to keep in mind as we're building processes that conditional logic using custom fields can go off the rails super duper fast. It's very key to consider when you're building out multiple choice conditional logic around custom fields that you don't go too deep down the rabbit hole or you will not come out. And if you get to that point, please reach out to us. We will help you and we'll figure out exactly what's going on there. Now, that's just one application of custom fields around conditional logic, right? That idea of if this, then that. And we use multiple choice fields, which are misnamed and LeadSimple, but it does capture the function where you can choose from one of many options. And when you select that option, then again, it conditionally populates a new part of the process that wouldn't otherwise have happened. Now, in addition to that, we have other ways that information can be captured. There's your multiple choice fields. There are also text fields. There are currency fields. There are numerical fields. And there are percentage fields. There's also URL fields. And I think that's all of them. Mike, I'm forgetting one.
We're missing date and date time.
Date and date time. That's right. And again, all these different field types have various usages, but you'll find that most of the time your usage will typically be limited to your multiple choice, because that's where you're going to develop your conditional logic 90% of the time. Your currency fields, because those can be very helpful for tracking different dollar amounts, and then your text fields. Right? Those are going to be your three most common. The others all have usages as well. We're finding more and more usages as we continue to join softwares together for URL fields and using text fields to store IDs. We'll talk more about that on our next call, but there's a lot that you can do with these different fields to store information of all kinds and to make it accessible on an as-needed basis. And I really appreciate it. I want to call out your point, Mike, about the difference between storing information in a field versus in a note, right? Tying information into a note indicates that information is only useful one time. If you're storing it in a field, it's because we want to come back to it. And because we're talking about processes, that's super important, because our processes are going to be populated and understood and live by values that we're creating on a basis of a recurring need, right? We need to know this information ongoing. We need to know that this property is not pet friendly, or we need to know that this tenant has had 4 late payments. We shouldn't give them any other extensions, right? Hopefully we never get to that point. But that's why we're storing the information in the way that we are, because we want to re-access that information on a regular basis, because it's an important part of running our processes. Now, what we often find here is that many folks say, that's a lot of information to track, right? I don't want to deal with this. It's all in my head already. It's going to be too much work to document it, and my team's not going to be about that life. I don't want to put everybody through that. And ultimately, that's your call to make, where the goal of this is, as a business owner, to give you guys as much exposure and education as possible. However, I would encourage you that this is potentially a missed opportunity, right? There's a lot of value that you can glean. Now, the reality is value only comes from hard work and investment. And as business owners, you know that. Building your business takes a lot of work and a lot of time and mental and emotional investment. And if you want that process to continue, this is a way to start leveling up, incorporating custom fields and values into your processes. That's a little bit of a riff off topic, but the team knows that's how I typically do things. So apologies for the philosophical ramblings. Let's go ahead and pull things back a little bit. We talked about LeadSimple and using custom fields there. Mike, let's turn to you for a minute and maybe talk about joining values from one software to another. An example of that might be storing information in Airtable or creating automations using Zapier. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Can I talk about a specific use case that we've done?
Sure.
Yeah. In software, everything has a unique name. They're called IDs, but essentially what that means is every piece of information will generally have a very unique 3264 alphanumerical thing attached to it, which is a great thing for software, because it lets you be very intentional about what you want to access. So on LeadSimple's front, if we think about how we work with leads and processes themselves, every time you open a new process, so if you're onboarding 123 Street and you start a new process type, that will have a very specific name to it, an ID of just a bunch of characters. Then 456 Street, that will have its own unique name. So we can be very intentional about what we want to access. And where custom fields gets involved is it doesn't just lie in LeadSimple. Everything has its own ID when we're looking for different software. So something we've been able to do is when we're onboarding new clients, we try to keep our ecosystem very organized and very well connected. So things like a Slack channel for a new client, a Google Drive folder for a new client, all of those will have its own unique IDs for its independent softwares. And we want to make sure everything's able to talk to each other. So we get to build a global process, and we get to build our own custom fields of Google Drive folder, Slack channel ID, Google Meet calendar event. And storing those event IDs into their own custom fields allows us to then use other software, specifically Zapier, to be able to interact with those custom fields and then do a bunch of other incredible features with it, like search, update, reschedule, trigger other processes that are in relation to it, that helps keeps us organized to take notes, make sure we're on track for our client meetings, make sure we're on track for taking our notes properly, make sure we're importing our notes into the right areas. And it basically opens the floodgates to let everything communicate with each other in a way that you don't expect the software to do at face value.
Yeah, I love that example, Mike. I think a great way to expand on that for a moment, if I may, is going back to that idea of objects, right? So we talked about LeadSimple and how you have these 5 different objects. If you consider a different software, there's a whole different set of objects. Let's say, Mike, you mentioned Slack, right? In Slack, each channel is its own object, right? And that has a reference point. There is an ID that's associated with it. So there's all kinds of custom information that can be stored within that. And if you think about the Slack setup, it's an object and it doesn't really have any custom fields per se, but it has a continuous line of communication where you have threads and subthreads and all these other things. So that's how that software is structured. If you think about Google Calendar, which you mentioned a moment ago, each event is itself an object, right? The events are an object, the month is an object, the year is an object, and there's reference points for all of these. So by storing this custom information, these IDs in custom fields, it allows us to reference that information on demand and push or pull information as we need. So to just emphasize the point here and expand on what Mike mentioned, when we have a new client who joins our organization, and we'll talk more about this next week, we have a Zap that does all of those automations for us. It creates the new Slack channel. It adds all of our team members to it. It creates a new folder in our drive. It populates that folder with all of the templates that we're going to be using to build the processes. What else does it do, Mike?
Makes us a cup of coffee.
I'm sorry?
I said it makes us a cup of coffee.
Getting close to that one.
If only.
How much time do you think that one alone saves us?
Yeah, I would say ballpark, that's probably saving about 30 to 40 minutes per client. So for us, because we don't work with a high number of clients, it's honestly not a huge time saving thing. However, it is a tedium saving thing because doing all that stuff, it takes a bunch of just like boring work, right?
And it's hard to remember like all of those steps.
It is. Yeah, it's hard to remember. It's a lot of different things.
It also increases our quality to that point. It increases our quality a lot because we're not in calls searching for these different things because they've already been done every time.
Yeah, consistency is super important. And if we're not dropping the ball on any part of the creation, then we don't have to go backtrack and fix a mistake, or worse, look for a mistake and then spend time searching for it. It also helps with keeping the nomenclature the same, right? If everything's going off the same way, then we have a practiced habit of what the Google folders are named, what our Clockify events are named. So one of the other things that the automation does is we track our time internally based on the type of project we're working with the client. We need to create that project itself in another software called Clockify to help us track our time of engagement. And that automation also helps create all of those events, so we don't have to go inside. Again, if you think about it, there's Google, there's Slack, there's Clockify, there's LeadSimple itself, there's Google Calendar, all of these different things to keep in your head. And now I just let a robot do it, essentially.
Yeah, and to expand on that thought for a few moments, how does that apply to property managers? For every business, ultimately every business operates in generally the same way. We all have the same 5 departments in our business. There's marketing, sales, operations, leadership, and accounting. And those 5 zones of your business make up everything, right? There's a few other scattered things that may slip within those categories, but those are the kind of the 5 pillars. Now, within that, we all obviously have different ways of operating. We offer different services, and that's where the broad variance happens. But when you can look at a business objectively and think about, all right, how can I take this business and make it more efficient? Oftentimes there's crossover between one business and the other. That's just one thought to share there. Gosh, I had something else, but it's escaping me.
Is there a way you guys identify like what areas need to be automated, or how does that make sense? Is it just, oh, I've done this a lot?
Yeah, right
I
now, for us, oftentimes the things that we automate are the things that are annoying. Right? Everybody wants to do
Is that a
annoying
good
things.
way to look at it? What annoys you in your business?
Yeah, if you think about as a business owner, when you want to scale, you go through the process of defining what am I really good at and what are the things that I love, and then what are the things I'm not very good at or I hate. And then you take all the things that you don't like or you're not good at, and you find someone else who is really good at doing those things and you hire them, and they take all that off your plate. And that's what allows scale. Now, here we're just talking about things that are annoying. So whether it's annoying for me or it's annoying for Mike, it may not be annoying for Mike. Mike might enjoy that type of minutia, but ultimately ultimately it is very low dollar per hour work, right? It's not something that we need to pay someone to do, because we can pay a $50 subscription to Zapier and have it do 40 minutes of work in 10 seconds, if that. And it's done, and we never have to do it again. And that continues to operate ongoing into the future. Now we're deviating away from our ideas of custom fields here. Let's see if we can bring that back around a little bit.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. We have just a couple minutes left. So.
Okay, all right, let's see. So to just bring things to a little bit of a close, obviously we could nerd out about this for a long time, but as we're considering how we use custom fields, I guess what I want to encourage our viewers to consider is what information are they storing that they need to access on an ongoing basis? I think that's really the key consideration and the question that needs to be asked as we're examining, what do I do with this information? Is it something that I'm going to need again? Or is it something that I only need one time? And in many cases, if you only need it the one time, if we're talking about LeadSimple, it belongs in a process field because we only need it in that one process, right? If it's a piece of information that we need again and again, then we may have to consider a different way to store that, like a property field or a contact field. And there's various ramifications that fall from the selections that you make, and we can help you or guide you through all the specifics. But I think that's really the key question to consider as you are thinking through how to structure your processes.